Good evening and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So one of the big issues in front of Toronto City Council that has become very newsworthy of late is inclusionary zoning, which is a pretty confusing term. What does it mean? What does it mean for developers? What does it mean for affordable housing? And so I wanted to turn to a gentleman that I really respect, Leor Margulies, who is the head of real estate legal work at Robbins Appleby LLP. He's a fascinating individual, educated at McGill University in law. He spent 19 years on the board of BUILD, the Builders Industry Association. And he's, as I mentioned, head of 20 different lawyers at Robbins Appleby in their real estate area. Leor, welcome to our show. Tell us, what is inclusionary zoning?
Well, it's it's now known as IZ. When you read all the materials, you see IZ, and I kept thinking this was something from Lacoste, but no, it's not as glamorous as that. Inclusionary zoning is a concept. It's a concept that presupposes that new housing excludes low income, moderate income people. So regular housing is considered exclusionary zoning. So the middle and the left and the social conscious people that say everybody should live together in terms of rich, poor, wealthy, high income earners, low income earners. There should be more integration and more opportunity for low income earners to have opportunity to either rent or buy. So they need inclusionary zoning. And inclusionary zoning is to basically include either voluntarily in some jurisdictions or mandatorily in many, and including what's coming up in Toronto, affordable, what they call affordable housing for those that are at a certain income level. And every jurisdiction picks their own income levels. Toronto, from what I've seen, and material is coming out. In fact, this afternoon, I just got, and I've just been digesting that and the pizza that I was eating, their latest inclusionary zoning implementation guidelines. It came out today to actually give some meat to pages and pages of materials that they came out with. But essentially, the idea of inclusionary zoning is to require developers that are developing new housing, and it's generally it's intensified housing. In Toronto, it's going to be a development that has at least 100 units that will have this applicability. So smaller developments will not be affected. But anything 100 and over will fall under this category in certain areas only. And again, every city is different, but the idea is to create a mandatory minimum number of either rental units or houses for purchase for income earners at a certain lower level. And in Toronto, it's going to be somewhere between 30 to 50%, roughly, don't quote me, but somewhere in there in terms of the eligibility to either buy or rent those affordable housing units.
30 to 50% of what?
Of the median income in Toronto.
There's going to be a certain number of units available for people that earn between 30 and 50% of the median average income.
Well, the certain number will depend on going forward, the number of units that are built by developers in those areas that qualify for inclusionary zoning. So just to give you the history, so the concept is, depending on where we say they have to have them and the type of buildings they have to have them, the idea is you can't just build a building and have if it's whatever the level is. Here it's 100 units. You can't build a unit and say it's going to be $2,000 a foot, and whoever can afford them, that's fine. If you can't afford them, you don't move in. That concept is gone for the areas and the size of buildings. They're going to say it's going to be right now for ownership, a 10% of those new units. So if it was a 100-unit building, for argument's sake, that was being built, and it has to be built in a certain area. And the way the Conservatives, the province, it's interesting. You have to sort of look at the history. It's so political.
Well, we're going to come back and talk about history.
So that's what inclusionary zoning is: requiring a low cost of affordable housing in every building, irrespective of the ability of the a purchaser or renter to pay market. They actually, a certain number has to be below market for eligible people. That's the theory.
And we're going to come back after messages and go through the history and implementation and some of the criteria and stuff like that. But just what do you think? Is this a good idea or a bad idea?
Okay. Notionally, it's a good idea. The building industry, it supports finding ways to create affordable housing. The question is this the way to do it? And the way it's being done. So notionally, personally, I think there are better ways, but I think most developers are in support of creating affordable housing. But the way it's being proposed, once you see how it rolls out, I think you'll agree that there are some significant problems for everybody else who isn't lucky enough to get one of these inexpensive units.
We're chatting tonight with Leor Margulies. He's the head of real estate legal work at Robbins Appleby about inclusionary zoning, a new policy the city of Toronto is implementing, and it's something that may actually roll out across the province of Ontario, at least in major urban centers. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back more with Leor in just a minute. Stay with us.
There's a lot.
Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour, Saga 960. We're chatting tonight about inclusionary zoning. This is a new policy that the city of Toronto is looking at implementing, and it's something that the province of Ontario has been thinking about. And we're joined by Leor Margulies. I apologize. Leor Margulies, who is head of legal work at Robbins Appleby. He's got 20 different lawyers that work for him at Robbins Appleby, or work with him, I should probably say. And I was astounded to look at your resume and see that you've been on build for 19 years. Don't they kick people off of boards after a while? Like, my gosh, that's a long time.
Well, actually, there's two things I have to correct. There's actually 32 lawyers in our firm. There's only 9 or 10 in my group, and 10 paralegals. So I don't control everybody in the firm, but I have a lot of influence. And actually, I've been on the build board since '99, so it's actually 23 years. And yes, there are limitations, but I've also been on their executive since that time. They basically wanted a free lawyer. So I guess I've added some value, and it's an industry that I love and that I've enjoyed giving back to the industry and to people. Really, everyone needs a house. That's basically
thank you
what
for
it is.
making that contribution. So tell us a little bit about the history. So inclusionary zoning is something that numerous different municipalities, jurisdictions across North America have been talking about. Is that not the case? That
is the case. We're not the first. Ontario is not the first. There's a major centers. There's 2 in Canada, Vancouver and Montreal, and 8 or 9 in the U.S. You can name every sort of major city here: Boston, New York, Washington, Portland, Seattle. It goes on and on. So there's a lot of precedent for creating affordable housing. And then the theory is, finding ways to integrate lower income people into everywhere in the city and not putting them in ghettos or low cost housing. So how did it start here? Well, it started, one of the many political efforts by the Liberals as they were going down with the ship in 2018. In April of 2000, they came up with 4 or 5 pieces of legislation, mostly aimed at the industry, the real estate industry. They froze rents. They did all kinds of things. So they threw out this inclusionary zoning that allows municipalities to create in their zoning bylaws a component of what we call affordable housing, either rental or purchase. They left the framework totally open. It was unclear as to how it was going to roll out, who was going to pay for it. Someone has to pay for these things, right? If you build a unit and it's worth $200,000 and it costs $150,000 and you're selling it $100,000 because that's the affordable housing number, well, who's going to pay for the difference? Well, that legislation didn't address it. So the Conservatives came in and they said, okay, this is still a good idea, but let's look at, certainly for Toronto, where is it going to work? And it's going to work in those high value areas and the high transit areas. And they have these nodes, and there's an acronym here, PMTSAs, the Municipal Transit Authority areas. Basically, all the nodes where you would build high rises, where you'd have high density, where there'd be high value, where investors want to build. And they figured those would be the right areas to start this system. They also said that it would be eligible in Toronto for wherever you had the development permit system, which was a system that has not come in here, which would, if you listen to if you were listening to my last one, listeners, we talked about a movement to move development approvals quickly. The province was advocating doing that as well. And if the city has an area where it has this approval process that you can move through quickly, you can bring in affordable housing. It was sort of the carrot to the city saying, you want to put in IZ, as I call it, inclusionary zoning, put the DPS in. Well, they haven't figured that out yet because it's a mess. But what they do have is transit areas. So that's basically where these are going to come, the major transit nodes, virtually everywhere in 416, other than in the downtown, the North York Center, Etobicoke. There's a map, and most of it is around the nodes,
around major transit stations, either
right, exactly,
right.
So that was number 2, and then number 3. So the city said, okay, let's start doing this. And last September they came out with some very detailed proposals. They had a report from Barry Lyons, a very consultant, a very well-known real estate consultant. And then they started discussions with many groups, but significantly developers, because we have to build it, we have to pay for it. And there were many things in that proposal that were very problematic. And it's gone on. They have made changes. They've listened to us a little bit, but they've now come out with their what they consider their final proposals that are going to the planning committee this Thursday, October 28th. And if it's approved, and there are 3 councillors that make up the 5-person committee there that are, quite frankly, on the left side. So I fully expect these proposals either to be approved, or actually there's talk about making them even more intense, because right now it's 10% of your building has to be IZ. They're talking about making it 20% right now. So who knows what's going to happen on Thursday. And then 2 weeks later, it goes to city council. And it's looking at being implemented effective September 22. One of the things that they have agreed to is not bring it in all at once in terms of the requirements. It's going to be staged over from 22 to September 30, but it will ratchet up. So the 10% will be 22%. 22% of your building over 100 units in 2030 will have to be this affordable, this IZ affordable housing, either rental or home ownership. And so the question is, who's going to pay for that?
Who do you think will?
Well, it's not, there's no thought. So let's look what all the other cities have done. We're not the first one, I said, right? And so there's a lot of lessons to be learned, good and bad. Some tough cities are tougher, some are less, but all of them have followed one basic philosophy. And that was even in the report, the Barry Lyons report, that was prepared for the city, that formed the basis of the city's analysis. One of the key things, I've got to read this out to you. I don't like to read other people's words, but it's so clear that even Barry Lyons group indicated that. Give me 1 second, because I think it says it all. It's the. Give me 1 second.
It's interesting that I've done in the past a major study on changes in corporate taxation. And what those studies suggested that as countries changed the corporate taxation rates, the returns that the companies enjoyed actually stayed the same if you increase corporate taxation rates. What ended up happening is they just passed it on to the consumers. And so therefore, corporate taxation changes where you increase the corporate taxation rate really were an indirect consumer HST tax, and the consumer ended up paid. And so some of the criticism that I've heard of inclusionary zoning is that all that's going to end up happening is you're going to make 10% of your units less economic. And so therefore you're going to make 90% of the remaining, you're going to make the remaining 90% of the units more expensive. And so while you may be giving this benefit to lower income people that they can get more affordable units, you're effectively making 90% of the population less affordable.
Well, that's exactly right. That's the exact nub of the problem of this proposal versus all of the ones in the US and in the rest of Canada for that matter, because there is nothing, zero. When I say zero, it's zero that's being contributed from the city directly or indirectly towards the cost of IZ. The total cost of IZ is on the development side, which means it's an extra cost or tax, just like we raise development charges or HST or whatever, and it gets passed on to the consumer. And the Altus Group, which is a well-known consulting group for the industry, very well respected. They valued the cost of that 10% currently at $67,000. So every unit, so if your unit was going to be $850,000 before, it's now going to be $917,000 to pay for inclusionary zoning. That's on if we were building an affordable housing unit to purchase. If it was a rental unit, it would be a little less. It would be 45,000.
Let me ask you a question. You know, you've said at the top that you think it actually makes sense to have affordable housing made available. As a societal principle, I think that makes sense to have affordable housing made available. But why have the cost of that all be put on new home buyers? Because what you're saying is that 10% cost is going to be transferred to every other one of the condos or the apartments or the rental housing, and that price is going to go up by $67,000. And so therefore it's not every taxpayer that's going to pay. It's not the city that's going to pay. It's not going to be general revenue that's going to pay. It's new home buyers. They're going to end up paying for the affordability of the low income homes.
Okay, well,
is that fair? Does that make any sense?
It isn't fair, but to be fair to the city, I mean, you know, they spent a lot of time. Their assessment is this. Their assessment is these are very valuable land sites, and that because there'll be an extra cost that's added, let's say the 67,000, when you purchase that land, the land cost will drop to absorb that extra cost, so it'll be neutral. So where's it going to come out of? It'll come out of the landowner who is making a lot of money. He'll make less money because the market will dictate that it go down. The reality is that that's if you know economics, and I haven't studied them for years, that works very well in a fully elastic a supply-demand curve, that it goes up and down. This is, unfortunately, housing is relatively inelastic. People need it. People have to stay somewhere, and they don't have the choice to say, I'm not going to buy. So what generally happens is most of that cost will get absorbed and will get increased in the price, and it will be paid for by the consumer, and the land price will not come down. And that's one of the major misassumptions. I don't know, that's not correct English, but wrong assumptions that the city has made in the terms of how this is going to work out. Because in every other, what I was trying to get at, you know, what they've talked about is that Barry Lyons says that the central principle is that development density is traded to offset the cost of deliverable housing. In some cases, there are also offsetting financial programs, tax incentives, etc. You cut DCs, you cut parkland, etc. And they put this in bold. But it is this exchange of added density for affordable units that has underpinned the success of these policies. So that's how it's worked in the States. It's been a trade. They say, look, developer, you're going to have to kick in something, but you're not going to kick in the full 67,000. You're going to kick in, I don't know what the number is because I haven't done a deep dive. It's 10,000, but we're going to pay for the rest. How are we going to pay for the rest? We'll cut the development charges. We'll cut the parklands. We'll give you a deferment on taxes. We'll do tax increment financing. But the main thing is what they do in the States. They says, okay, you have the zoning, you're going to get 20 stories, and 2 stories are going to be affordable housing. But who's going to pay for that? So what the developer says, look, I'm losing money on that, okay? Give me another 2 levels that I can build. So give me 22 stories, extra density, and I can make money on that to recoup. And that's how, you know, in large part, most of the jurisdictions have dealt with it. They've dealt with it in other ways, which the city can do. They can change the zoning rules, the setback rules. Remember, I talked about this 25-meter bullshit, that you can't build more than 25 meters. So you soak up so much valuable downtown land. So you cut it down to 15. You could do so many things that would create value that would allow the developer not to have to pass on the 67. But they've done, I'm sort of very passionate about this because I've read this like for the last 4 days to make sure I'm not missing any. And their philosophy is we're not giving anything. They put in their report, this isn't costing the city anything. Well, who's it going to cost? It is costing the city. It's just costing some of the people in the city, not all of the people. And the way they look at it, those other people don't count. If
you're right, and frankly, I think I'm right based on my experience with corporate taxes and just basic economics. If the landowner isn't willing to reduce their selling price by $67,000 per a buildable unit.
Right.
And the developer's not willing to take that $67,000 because he's got to make his return, because investors is demand his, the investors are going to demand a return. The banker's going to demand the return.
Right,
So
exactly.
he can't arbitrarily, say I'm going to make $67,000 less per unit. There's only one other person it can be passed on to, which is the new home buyer. And so therefore this whole issue that we had in the federal election, where they were asking people about, the lack of affordable housing in Toronto, they weren't just talking about for lower income people. They were talking about just my kids, my sons and daughters that can't afford to buy in Toronto. But frankly, I can't afford to buy in Toronto, in a lot of Toronto. And all of that is going to become more expensive. $67,000 per unit more expensive, isn't it?
Well, it's not only that, because it may be that it becomes economic. You hit a price that people aren't going to buy. And so what's going to happen is you're going to end up with less supply, because at a certain point you just can't pass on forever.
But then if you have less supply,
that's even worse.
And demand stays the same, then prices are going to go up because of that.
They'll go up, and then you have less supply. Exactly. And the thing with IZ, there's no right or wrong. Is it the bottom 30%, the bottom 40%? You could make IZ for more affordable for people that are at the 60 or 70% level. And then, you could adjust things. You could mix and match, but the city has made a deliberate decision, right or wrong. The fact that the city council is controlled, by people on the left side, is a large part of it. They've gone to the lowest income to have housing, and they need it. But is it going to be in every building? Are you going to build a luxury building? People are paying $2,000 a foot, and then there'll be people paying, $400 a foot. What's that going to do to the markets? I'm not being, a snob or anything, but you have to deal. I'm just trying to deal with market realities, and there's ways to deal with it. And I think this is huge. It's huge because there's one thing we haven't even looked at it. No one's talked about it in any of the materials I've read. Now that I've read this 20-page implementation guidelines here, I'm reading about the administration of how you select tenants and how they will approve. Now we talked about red tape, right? And cutting it down, right? And moving development approvals along. Well, this is going to add to them, because what we're going to have is the new IZ department of the planning department is now going to have to approve the layouts of your building, the unit sizes. They're going to do a deeper dive into what you're building so that it complies with their regulations, number one. Then they're going to have a department dealing with the people renting, the people buying, to setting all that up. Who's going to? Someone's going to have to pay for that. That's going to be a huge bureaucracy, like we don't have one already.
One of the rumors that one hears about, in New York with co-op housing or rent controlled housing is that you end up getting a cheap apartment and you pass it on and you charge key money. So effectively, you end up getting the full market rate, but it's not called rent; it's called key money. Are we going to have people all of a sudden paying key money to get one of these IZ condos?
No, before this afternoon, I couldn't have given you the answer, but reading how it's going to work, no, they have built-in controls so that if somebody owns an apartment, everything has to go. There'll be once the building is built and rented or sold, someone is going to manage that building if there were 20 units, and there will be different companies that will be established and approved by the city. Who they'll be, what they'll be, how they'll operate, no idea. But let's presume that we got a company, they're going to administer. So when I sell the property, it's got to go to another eligible purchaser at that income level that the city set. So it can't be anybody.
What's going to stop that?
Same with a renter. Same with a renter.
From giving me an extra couple $1,000 to be the person that with that income level, I can get the apartment, which is exactly what happens in New York.
You won't qualify. No, but you won't qualify. The city won't allow you, and the administrator won't allow that sale to go through if you're not a qualified buyer at a certain income level. But and similarly, a tenant, you can't pass it on either.
You're going to have lots of people at that income level looking for that spot. Who's the one that gets to make it? It's the B&B.
It's a lottery. That's a good question too. I read that too. They're going to have a lottery. Once you're eligible and you go into that pool and say, I want to bid for, 25 Yonge Street, and there's 50 units there, and you're in that pool, you can go into that pool. Now there'll be different levels. If you're a single person, you can get a 1-bedroom. If you're a double, if you're a couple, you can get a 2 or 3-bedroom. So there's certain eligibility requirements. But in those pools, it'll be a lottery. So if 100 guys, like you put in, that's what it'll be. How is this going to be? We could do waiting lists, but that would even be worse, So yeah, it's going to be, again, this is brand new. This is brand new. It's draft. I don't even know if my build members have seen it yet. My partner who's on the affordable housing side, he's read it. But I think he's one of the few. So it's going to be interesting.
We're chatting about inclusionary zoning tonight. We're going to take a break and come back more with Leor Margulies of Robbins Appleby about inclusionary zoning. It doesn't make any sense. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting with Leor Margulies. He is the head of the legal department at Robbins Appleby that specializes in real estate law in Toronto. He's talking to us tonight about inclusionary zoning. Inclusionary zoning is a new regulation policy that the City of Toronto is considering implementing. And what it is going to do is it's going to mandate that developers in certain areas of Toronto called these high density transit nodes that Leor has described are going to have to include in their development 10% of their units as affordable housing. And the affordable housing is going to be defined as that can be afforded by people that are earning between, I think you said, Leor, between 30 and 50% of the median income level.
That's sort of the range. Yes,
society.
that's what they're talking about.
And so therefore they're going to be more affordable. And we talked in our first interview a couple of weeks ago about development fees. And my sense of what you said was that a lot of these development fees that are charged on homes don't get paid for by the developer, get passed on to the consumer. And the effect of cities putting all these building permit fees and development fees on is not to reduce the profit or returns of the developers or of the bankers or the investors that finance them or of the landowners that sell to them, but effectively increases the price of the condos. And if that's true, and I've heard that from lots of other people, then this obligation to have 10% of my units be more affordable, the cost of that is logically going to be added on to the cost of the condos or the apartments that I'm renting, and are going to be passed on to the consumers. And that, I think, is the conclusion that you've come to. Is that not correct?
That is the conclusion. It's not the conclusion that the city has come to. As I said, they feel that the land prices will simply drop. And that's just not true. I've spoken to developers and lawyers about how the reality is of a purchase of lands. It's not going to happen. You've got a guy, he's got his piece of land. He thinks it's worth X. He's gonna wait for it. And if the developer needs it, they'll pay more for it. It will really be a function of how high can prices go until we hit a ceiling. And then we stop building. And then when we don't build because it's uneconomic, then we have a worse supply. And we've talked about that. But when we talk about all these charges, the city is already collecting in the charges that they're adding to the cost of a house. And we talked about it last week. I think it was, I've now confirmed the number approximately is about 187,000 of tax charges are added to a new condo. So now we're going to add 187 plus 67. What does that make it? 254. So the number is now $250,000 of your purchase price is not going anywhere near a developer or a worker or anybody. It's going into the government fund. Now, some of that, it's interesting. 7%, roughly 7% of DCs and a certain component of what used to be the Section 37 bonusing charge is now a CBC, community benefit charge, is allocated towards affordable housing. I think the numbers that I got from Build were approximately between the two of them, about $8,000 already would be allocated, given to the city to be used for affordable housing. So they've already got a fund designated. So now we have another, the 8,000 doesn't get you that far. But again, why is the new home buyer paying for all of it? They're already paying for 8,000 already off the bat before we do anything. Now they're going to pay another 67. It's not right. If this is something that the society feels is appropriate, and depending what side of the fence you are, or maybe it is, it isn't, let's say it is. And I believe everyone has to live somewhere. Since society should pay for it, why should you, the new home buyer, the first-time buyer, have to pay another 60 grand so that someone else can live, so that we can have mix and match in a building? if that's the objective, then it should be done collectively, either through taxes, property taxes. We know this city of Toronto, the city of Toronto has the lowest residential taxes probably in most of Ontario, in terms of the percentage. They keep the residential rate really low and they keep the commercial rate really high because politically it's suicide to raise it. But you know what? If we say that everybody in the city should contribute because we feel that everyone, we should have people living in homes, and that's right. So raise the tax rate a little bit. That's life. Then we all pay for it. But
Well,
why?
I think the other solution that you identified that was in the Altus report, or maybe it was the Barry Lyons report, was to give people bonuses. And I've seen that work go effectively in the past, and it makes sense. If you're going to force me to add, as you used, in your 20-story building, 2 stories of it, 10% of it as affordable, then compensate me by giving me 2 more stories. And so therefore, if you give me rather than 20 stories, you give me 22 stories or 23 stories, then I'm making more money than I would have otherwise been able to with the prior zoning.
Right.
And I'd be happy to use that extra profit to somehow contribute to society goods.
Exactly. I mean,
Society
when
welfare.
when I look at the U.S., I'm trying. There's so many charts here. Out of the 8 or 9, out of the 11 cities that we canvassed across North America, 10 of them allow extra density as a means for paying. I can't remember which was the one that was the one outlier. It may have been Portland, which is, has its own issues, but virtually everybody else has acknowledged that. Nobody's like this fear of giving a few extra stories. What difference does it make in the totality of the impact on the environment? So there'll be, everyone's going to complain. There's going to be too much traffic, too much parking. I mean, like, people have to live somewhere.
Well, particularly if you were giving those 2 extra stories to
pay for
a societal
exactly.
good of more
Exactly.
affordable mixed use housing.
Exactly. I mean, one other simple thing they could start doing, if they keep saying that we want to build where the transit is, the province has dictated, has mandated that, the city says, yeah, that's what we want to do, but they don't do it. They haven't. We have swaths of land that are near transit areas that have density of 1 or 2 or 3 times coverage, which is 1 times the space. That's how much you can build. It's crazy. What they should be doing is zoning all of those sites as of right. So a developer doesn't have to spend 5 years fighting with the city to get the zoning. It's there. He may have to pay more, but he gets it right away. That has a larger value.
Also, we want people to build higher density near transit. And so isn't this by definition going to be providing a disincentive to building higher density near transit?
Yes.
Because what these developers are going to do is they're going to say, if I go, another 800 meters and I'm out of this high density transit node, I'm not going to have the inclusionary zoning obligation. Or they're going to say, I could build 120 units on this site, but I'm going to go at 99 because at 99, I don't have to be inclusionary zoning. At 101, I have to be.
Or there's 2 zones. Or
they're going to go to Vaughan.
Or they go to Vaughan, yeah.
Where inclusionary zoning doesn't happen.
Or as you said, they'll move out because the city has covered most of the city with inclusionary zoning. There's only a couple of areas that aren't. But there's different levels. So if you're in a moderate area, it's not 10%. I think it's 7%. So 7% is something that the developers have indicated that they could live with. But 10% is high. And builders come back, and said, look, we'll do 10%, but give us a break somewhere to cover some of that cost. Give us a break on development charge, something, do a little horse trading. Why are you asking us to pay this massive amount all in one shot right away? It's not right. It's not right. Look, the developer, he'll either build or he won't build. He's got his site, and everyone, I can tell you, those people that have sites that are will get their applications in by September of 22, and they'll be grandfathered. So it's only new stuff. So it's basically, people buying land now know that they're going to be in this. So
you've done lots of these deals. What of a typical condo? What percentage of it is construction financing, is debt? 65, 75%?
Well, the way it works is usually have about, say, 10, let's say 10% plus or minus of real equity. You might have another 10 to 15% of purchaser deposits that are insured by the insurance companies. So you get up to about 75%. So something like 70 to 75% is financed, or maybe less if you've got
okay, so let's say let's take those numbers. So 75% is financed.
Okay.
If 75% is financed, that gets paid back in an interest rate. Will the bank, once inclusionary zoning is put in place, lower its interest rate?
Why would they do that?
Exactly. They won't. So the interest rate doesn't go down. So the deposit is the next, you say 15%.
Right.
The deposit is the deposit all of a sudden going to go up by 15%?
No, it's actually going to go down because 10% of the units will be sold to people buying at much less. So your
So you're gonna
overall
actually get
deposits
less
will shrink. So I'll have less deposits to play
So
with
that
to build the
10%
same
of
building.
the equity that you're going to put in is going to have to go up to probably 11.5 to 12%.
Or more. Yeah. No, yes,
So-
that's right. You'll need more equity.
10%. And that this developer is working overtime to get 10% of the construction cost as profit.
Right.
As return.
10, 11 is the number. Yes. If you look at the
Okay.
Altus report, the target is 11%.
Okay. And their return is what? Can you give me any guesstimate about what their return is?
Well, it all depends on how that varies. Depends on how much equity they put in and how much they borrow. So if
But they
you know
borrowed
that,
75%.
yeah, so their returns could be, well, we'll figure it out. If you put in 10 and you're getting a 10% return on the cost, it might be 20%, might
Okay,
be
so
25.
let's
It's usually 25% IRR. I think, don't quote me.
So let's say it's a 20% levered IRR.
Right.
So if they're going to give up the inclusionary zoning, which is going to be effectively on the total value of the construction, right? So 10,
Right.
10% of the total value of the construction, and 85% to 90% of the construction cost is not going to change its return.
Right.
So all that return's got to come out of the developer.
Right.
Effectively, you're asking the developer to cut the returns by 50%.
Well, that's
The
right.
chance of that happening is what?
It's very slim.
0.
Yeah, unless they have a very lucrative project and the returns are already high so that it can be absorbed. But quite frankly, with construction costs at their level and the cost of land, there aren't those big. You're not getting a big juice. It's the 10 or 11% is good.
This is the problem that I think that people have missed is that from the vast majority of the expenditure and the return for that expenditure, you're not going to change. You can't change. The bank, 75% is not going to change their interest return. You're not going to have it come down by some 10% number to compensate for the 10% inclusionary zoning. And the deposits, if anything, what you're saying is going to go down. So therefore, the whole impact, but based on what the government is believing, the whole impact's got to be borne by either the seller of the land or the developer. And if the developer's only making, as you said, 10% of the construction cost. And so they've got to cut their take by a substantial amount to compensate for the inclusionary zoning. I don't believe that will happen. I don't believe there's any comparable that has shown that it'll happen. Corporate taxes, it doesn't happen. GST, for this logic to exist, when the government increases the GST, then everyone would have reduced their selling prices, and they don't. They put the GST on top. For this argument to believe, you would have believed carbon taxes wouldn't be passed on to the consumer, the gas companies would make less, but it doesn't happen. Carbon taxes, you increase the price to the consumer. So every single time governments put on extra costs and extra taxes, business transfers it to the consumer because they have to, because they're always going to demand the same return. Or that new owner that has to pay the price.
Right. Or you could end up, with situations where the developer tries to squeeze out more revenue or cut costs to make those numbers work. So you end up with either an inferior product or, you end up adding extra, hidden charges to make up for it. It's not a very palatable prospect either way when you expect where the city has failed is they think the bulk of this cost will be absorbed by landowners. They're now getting $250 a foot downtown. Well, they're going to have to take $220, and that there is some truth in that. I mean, certainly what developers are using these days, to be fair, when they're negotiating for new land, knowing that it's going to go through the IZ process, they're telling the landowner, hey, it was worth $250 in the old days. That's great. I got to pass on $60,000 to my consumer. I can't raise my buildable rate, my charge out rate to purchasers. You're going to have to pay for stuff. So it may affect in part, but it's a false assumption that the bulk of that will be taken by the landowner. That's the basic theory of the city of where the 60 is coming from, and that is based on the report from Barry Lyons and Altus and others disagree. They disagree that and talking just on the ground, people buying and selling, that's not going to happen. There may be a softening a little bit, it's true, but not the full amount.
Okay, so then, I come back to what's the societal justification that says that the cost of providing affordable housing should be borne by people that own land?
Because people, the theory is people who are buying these houses are and apartments are getting money from the parents, and you know what? They'll lend them a little more, and that'll help the people that can't afford houses and apartments to buy them and rent them, and that's okay. You know, those other people that are buying all the other apartments and houses, they can afford it, and it's wrong. Of course, that's a silly statement, but that is part of the theory.
That's if you and I are right that it gets passed on. But what if the government's right that the landowners, the existing landowners, will bear the brunt of the cost? Why is there justification that says that some, you know, I met a guy that bought 6 buildings on a street in downtown Toronto like 20 years ago and has been renting them out, now wants to sell them. Why is the price of providing affordable housing all of a sudden we got to tax, effectively charge existing people that own land that price? Like,
Because
why is it that they have to pay for societal good? One small group of society, you know, how many people in society own developable land in Toronto? 1%, 2%? Why are they the ones that are paying for this societal good?
Okay, I'll play devil's advocate, or to be fair, you know, there are two sides, and we're only the, you know, sort of one side. The theory is, remember, the province, the Ford's government said, let's focus on the transit areas because there's value there. And the theory is, the province has invested a lot of money on the subways, on the streetcars, and on the crosstown rail. And that's creating value. So suddenly your land that was on those nodes has gone up in value. And it's not fair that you should absorb all that value. You should give some of it back to in terms of affordable housing.
Okay,
that's
so
part of the theory. And there's, you know, you have to sort of throw that into the mix to see how it works, because there is some merit.
It's not a bad theory. And the province has on its books, it's never used it, incremental tax financing.
Yes, that's right.
But the premise there is, look, this area used to be zoned at what, 3 times coverage, because that was what was the appropriate zoning without transit. But if we put transit in there, we are going to increase the zoning to 5 or 7 times or whatever it is coverage. That makes sense. As you increase the zoning to tax away some of that incremental increase in zoning, because that's going to pay for the transit that justifies that increase in zoning. That makes complete sense for me. But that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is the zoning already is what the zoning is. They're not increasing the density, you're saying.
Well, I mean, they will, or they have, and values have gone up. So there is some fairness there, but there's a better way to deal with it rather than making it across the board. Every building, you know, 3/4 of them, you're right, have the zoning, have already bought their land, and the zoning is coming in later. And they're going to pay for that extra zoning. Remember, you pay for the extra zoning, used to be under Section 37 when it got increased. Now it's under the CBC. It's going to be 4% of the value of the land is going to be contributed. So you're already paying for that. So now we're paying for more. How much do you have to pay for it? That's the question, you know? Okay,
let's talk quickly about how it's going to be implemented. Some people were rushing to get building permits in because they thought they could get grandfathered. Does that exist now?
Well, they've moved out. Originally was going to start, for properties that didn't have their full zoning application or full zoning and site plan by January 1st, 22. And the build was able to get that extended to September of 22. So if you have your essentially, you know, zoning and site plan in full, a complete application, and that's an interesting one because it's the city who determines if it's complete. And if you're missing stuff, well, you know, but let's leave that aside. Let's assume that everyone will act in good faith. You'd be grandfathered. So if you're not ready, if you haven't bought your land, or if you bought it, but you're still much earlier in the zoning site plan process and you don't have it in by the September 22, when you do bring it in, it will be subject to these rules. And it goes up, it ratchets up. The 10% is for the first 2 years only. Like I said, by 30, it goes up to 22%. When I put in my application in September 2030, oh my God, it sounds like something out of science fiction. 2030, I'm going to have to dedicate 22% of my building. So this 67 in today's numbers is now 134. Now it's less for rental. It is less for rental, but still very significant.
Right now, there's a requirement to replace rental units. Does that requirement go away?
No, okay, they've addressed that. They've addressed everything. They've been very thorough. I have to give the city credit. They spent a lot of time. They didn't miss a trick. No, if you have to replace units, you have to replace units. So if you have, we had a building at St. Clair and Bathurst, we had to replace 6 units. So those 6 are there, and they're there for 20 years.
Is
That's
that
still
included in the 10%?
no,
or?
it's on top of it. No, it's on top of it. So if I was doing that building now, or in 22, the one at St. Clair Bathurst, I'd have to give them that 6, plus we had 270 units. So I have to give them another 27 affordable. So there'd be a total of 33. So it's not included. They make it clear it's not included. You don't get some bonus because you're just replacing. And then, there's a certain fairness there. The theory was you should be replacing what's there. This is something entirely different. This is to create stuff that wasn't there. So, so you don't get a help on that one. No. Sorry.
And I've heard that in some of these buildings, some of the rental replacement are at their bottom, and the nice things are at the top. Is there an obligation that these more affordable units be scattered through the whole building, or can you have
I haven't.
in one area?
Again, I've just had one run through the procedural manual. I don't think so, and they didn't require that either for the affordable, but they do require that you can't make them different. You can't make, everybody gets, a nice, you have to finish it. The basic finishings and layouts have to be similar to others. And they do have sizing, and they have, the sizing is like, 30 meters for square meters for a studio, 48 square meters for a 1-bedroom, 60 square meters for a 2-bedroom, and so on. So they're not huge units, to be fair. And those are what you have. That's the minimum you have to build. Of course, you can build them bigger, but why would you build them bigger? Because you're getting, 60% of rent. I mean, the rents that you can charge, there's a formula that 10 or 20% of even the rents that you charge have to be even lower. There's a formula within a formula, so you don't even get it's 30. It's uneconomic. Let's put it this way. To put it simply.
Leor Margulies, Robbins Appleby, thank you for joining us tonight and talking a little bit about inclusionary zonings, some of the problems with this implementation, what you think of it, and who you think is going to carry the brunt of the impact. Really appreciate your help.
My pleasure.
Well, that's our show for tonight, everybody. If you want to get my view on it, you probably have gathered it. I think that from a societal standpoint, having more affordable housing, having inclusionary zoning makes a ton of sense. But I think that this is being implemented incorrectly. I think that Leor talked about providing increased density as compensation as the way to economically justify it. Makes sense. And I think there's a lot of other things within government control, some of which Leor and I talked about in prior conversations, that could make all of housing in Toronto and the Greater Toronto Area, Ontario, et cetera, more affordable, like lowering development fees, like making more land available, like shortening the time period for approvals, like increasing zoning. There's a lot of things that government does, because I think government's got a large role, negative role, in increasing the cost of housing in the Greater Toronto Area. And government should be looking at that as much as they're looking at how they can pass on this cost to landowners and developers. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.